Welcome to this YouTube channel. So on this show today, I have Mr. Anil Swaroop. His name needs no introduction. He is one of the most famous civil servants in the country. Now in his post-retired life also, sir has become an accomplished author. And so welcome to the show, sir. And it's a real pleasure that we have you. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. So, sir, I'll come straight away into the questions. Sir, please tell us about your formative years, an incident that shaped your life and was like something like, even if today you were to look back at your childhood, yeah, you can pinpoint that, yes, this is one instance which just shaped the trajectory of my life.
No, it didn't happen that way. I don't think a single incident
Or maybe a
shaped the
series
trajectory
of
of my
them.
life. I have always believed it is only in films that you have a single incident transforming the life of a human being. As far as the normal life is concerned, I think it's a series of events. As you evolve, you keep changing, you keep evolving, and you keep improving if you want to do well in life. That's how it happens. And it will be very difficult for me to pinpoint a single incident, for me to say, this is where I changed and became. No, it didn't happen that way. Right from my schooling days, as I mentioned in my book, right in the beginning, when I could comprehend and read, I found a piece of paper where my dad had defined my career. Of course, it changed a bit in terms of what I finally got educated in and how I took my exams. But the planning was done by him. At that point in time, I didn't even really understand that paper. It was only later that I understood that paper in terms of what will I do in BA and MA. Of course, he had thought during those times, and history was the paper that most of the civil servants took. He thought I should be doing my master's in history. I ended up doing my master's in political science. So there were minor changes here and there. The examination system also underwent a change when Kothari Commission report was implemented, and the examination was totally transformed. In fact, it was the first year for me when I appeared in 79, the year I qualified for the police service, that the new examination system came into being, and we were absolutely clueless as to how it's going to happen. But all said and done, it was the influence of a number of people who I came to be associated with me throughout my life that changed me what I am and made me what I am today. So I'm indebted to each one of them.
Sir, you were like a gold medalist, a Chancellor's Gold Medalist recipient for Pol Science at Allahabad University, and you're the best all-round student there. So, as you know, as in just an objectively, if I were to look at the careers of why civil services, you could have opted for a far more lucrative career, let's say MBA. So, was it like you had once said that your father had fulfilled his father's dream of being an engineer, and you had to fulfill his dream of your being an IAS officer? So, was it that philosophy that shaped this decision?
No, to begin with, I didn't understand much of it. But gradually, I owned up the dream of my father, and I wanted to fulfill, because it was not then only his dream, it became my dream. As far as the term lucrative is concerned, you have to define what you mean by lucrative. To me, the service itself was so lucrative because bottom line of any earning is sense of satisfaction. If anything gives you sense of satisfaction, that probably is the most lucrative within inverted commas. If you mean only money by lucrative, money is a function of your needs. If you have your limited needs, I think civil service gives you enormous amount of money in the sense of fulfillment, and sufficient money in the sense of making your ends meet. So I never felt the need for any more money. So if you don't feel the need for more money, then what is this lucrative all about? I never felt deprived in the sense of not having something which someone in the private sector had. To me, what I needed was what I needed, not what my neighbor had. So if that be the case, it doesn't really matter much as to how much you get, so long as you get as much as you need for your need. And I thought I got as much as for my need. I led a very reasonably comfortable life. I'm leading a reasonably comfortable life now. But again, comfort is a subjective factor. Each individual has to define what is comfortable for him. For someone, driving in a Mercedes could be comfort. For someone like me, driving in a Baleno is as good. I've often wondered, why do people spend so much money in a Mercedes, which is value for money wise is absolutely nothing as compared to Baleno. So That being so, I'm sure they must be having good reasons to have a Mercedes. I don't grudge it either. But I am fairly satisfied with what I have and what I had within the career. And that is what that matters.
Yes, and this becomes quite more relevant because in this week only the civil servant UPSC results were out and there were a lot of celebrations of the toppers. And then you had some people saying that, okay, these people, let's see whether they will continue to serve the objective that they have stated in the interviews, or they also will fall into the power trap and the different routes to become wealthy, which you've also mentioned about the in your book also, that the ethical dilemmas of a civil servant. So you served like 1 year as an IPS officer and 38 years as an IAS officer. It's a long 39 years of service to the nation. What has been your most memorable stint? So across your 88 chapters, you have described a lot of them. But still, if I were to ask you to pinpoint one, what would be that one stint that you thought you made the most impact?
First of all, it was 38 years in all, one in police and 37 in
Acha.
the civils in
Okay.
the IAS. So it was 38 years. Secondly, again, like the first question that you asked, it is only in films that you find and define the defining moment or the best moment. For me, it's very difficult. If you have read both of my books, I have mentioned a number of Bharat Ratna moments. Now, it would be very difficult to compare one Bharat Ratna moment with another Bharat Ratna moment. They were all Bharat Ratnas for me. That gives me such enormous amount of satisfaction that I ultimately decide now that if I were to be born again, I'd like to be an IAS officer all over, because you can't have those moments anywhere else. I can't visualize. Of course, there could be some others who might say that they've had their Bharat Ratna moment elsewhere. But as far as I'm concerned, I came across those Bharat Ratna moments. Moments like when as a district magistrate, I found that old couple, half blind, coming back to return those 100 rupees that I gave them. Moments like when the old woman in the hospital, while talking to her, she tells me when she meets the Almighty, she's going to tell him that RSBY is one of the finest schemes. Now, these are the Bharat Ratna moments that I can't forget. Now, it will be difficult for me to compare these Bharat Ratna moments. You know, you can't compare one Bharat Ratna with another Bharat Ratna. These are Bharat Ratna moments. So I have had many such moments in my life, and I would not, I cannot, I should not say I would not want. I cannot compare because they have, I mean, I still get goosebumps while talking about those moments. So that's it. Now, how do you compare that whether the first moment was better than the second one? And people keep asking me these questions. Which was the best moment of your career? I can't say. When I was defending the chairman CBSE in a very tight situation, that was also a Bharat Ratna moment, because I was trying to defend a colleague who had committed no fault, and she was unnecessarily being hauled up by the media and everyone else. So that was also a Bharat Ratna moment. So it's a question of these small so-called victories, as I call them, that give you that kick. And I've used that word kick in both my books. So how can you differentiate between one kick or the other kick? These are all bricks, I tell myself, that build the structure that I'm enjoying now post-retirement. We're living in the memories of those moments that I spent. So it's very difficult for me to say this was the moment or this was the best moment in my career. No, I can't say that.
So what is the harsh reality of being an IAS officer? Because a lot of youngsters watching this show also want to become IAS officers. Like you've written about the frequent transfers. Youngsters would be curious to know that at one point, does power, prestige, does that come to you as like a big temptation? What are the ethical dilemmas that one faces? If you could just guide us on that.
You know, my book is all about dilemmas, ethical dilemmas. And right in the beginning of my book, I try to explain what I understand by ethics. Because ethics, philosophers have tried to define ever since the time of Aristotle. People have been trying to understand what ethics is. But my understanding of ethics is slightly different from the usual. To me, ethics is very personal. That is, your value system is very personal. It will be different from your brother. It will be different from your family. It will be different. But these guys around you, your family, your friends, your class fellows, your colleagues, influence your value system. But ultimately, it is your own value system that determines what is ethical for you. And secondly, this value system also, the ethical value system, undergo a change over a period of time. So, for example, you may be a non-vegetarian at some point in time, but you become a vegetarian, meaning thereby that your value system has also undergone a change. So it is not that ethical value system is good for all times and for everyone, or same for all time and everyone. When it becomes same for everyone, normally it gets codified in a law. So the difference between ethics and law is that law gets codified and it's uniformly applicable to everyone, whereas ethical is very personal and vary from individual to individual. So that's your subjective understanding of right and wrong. And this itself is determined by your value system in terms of what you think is right and wrong. Now, when you get into the civil service, you come with your own value system. And that value system sometimes clashes with what you see around you. That's where you make those choices. That is the dilemma that you face. Dilemma is all about making choices. So, for example, most of us, or at least I, when I entered the service, thought that all politicians are rascals. All politicians are busy making money. All politicians say everything that is wrong. And gradually I discovered how wrong I was. Because politicians also come up from the same social system as we do. And they're as many good, bad as we have. So they are no different. They are the same. They have their own value system in the constraints within which they work. For example, every MLA has to contest every 5 years. Every minister is not there for all times to come. So has his own circumstantial constraints within which a politician works. Once I started appreciating that, I was not antagonized by, or I took them as they were. And then things became very easy. Now, having said that, I was not compromising, but I was accommodating. One has to understand the difference between them. Compromising is that you compromise your own value system and do anything that he tells you. That's a compromise to obtain a particular objective. In a particular case, it could be not to get transferred out. Now, that's compromise. But accommodating is if a politician tells you to do something which is not illegal, which can be done, you should not impose your own value system and say this should be done. So that is the accommodation that I am talking about. Because we live in a democracy, and ultimate decision maker is the politician. If you read my book, in one of the chapters I come out that there were cases where politicians overruled me. Fair enough. In a democratic existence, he is the final arbiter. Then I should not push in my value system and put spokes in what he said. It's not done. For a civil servant, you say what you have to say and then go by what they say. But the problem comes when you start looking at your padosi. That's where the problem, much of the dilemma of a civil servant comes when he sees that he's living an austere life, but his padosi drawing the same salary has a car, has all the facilities. That's where the problem comes. It's the problem comes when need are not your need, but they are determined by somebody else. So you start looking at Amitabh Bachchan and start having that lifestyle. So that's where the problem comes. I've always believed that if you know what you want for yourself and you're not looking at your padosi and doing what you have to do, I don't think you'll face too many dilemmas. In fact, the dilemmas that I faced in the beginning of my career, which are in the initial chapters of my book, something which I reflect upon, maybe I may not have done that now. For example, in a terrorist operation, I as district magistrate was not required on the spot, but to build the morale of the police force, I traveled and stayed there overnight. Now, maybe I would not do that now. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but maybe it was not so much required. So the question here is, to what extent you understand a particular situation and you respond at that point in time. So long as there is no disconnect between your own value system and what you are trying to do, there will not be a problem. So the problem that a youngster gets, and one reason why I wrote Ethical Dilemmas was that when I used to go to address various seniority officers at the academy, I found that the officers who entered in the beginning were very enthusiastic. They wanted to do things. But as they went up the ladder, that enthusiasm waned. Some of them even became cynical. So when I addressed officers of phase 5, after they have put in 25 years of service, quite a few of them had become cynical. Then nothing can happen and, they've seen the world. It is that reason that I wrote this book, just to demonstrate to them that a lot depends on you, on how you evolve and what you do. And for inspiration of doing the right thing which you think is right, you should look at such officers who have done right and followed an ethical path and have yet succeeded. In my second book, that is The Ethical Dilemma of Civil Servant, there are more than 50 officers whose example I have given in the book to illustrate that these were absolutely above board. They led an ethical life, and almost all of them succeeded in life. So it's not that the cynicism that some officers have in terms of ethical behavior, not ultimate working. In one of the chapters, I clearly write that ethics is the way of life that ultimately triumphs, and honesty does pay. That's what I'm saying. And I determine this on the basis of the officers who've been honest and have successful. Now, this is not to say that honest officers have not paid a price. Like honest officers, even dishonest officers have paid a price. Two chief secretaries of the state of UP were sent to jail. They were dishonest, they were sent to jail. Now, there could be many dishonest officers who have not gone to jail. But this does not make you believe and should not make you believe that only dishonest people survive and thrive. That's the point I'm trying to make in my book, that whereas some dishonest officers have thrived, but dishonest officers have also gone behind the bar. Similarly, whereas honest officers have suffered, there are a lot many of honest officers who have done well. Now the choice is that of the civil servant. He has to take a call. So long as he's taking a call, he should be prepared for facing the consequences. Problem is, he doesn't take a call as per his own ethical value system. He finds the value system of his padosi and takes a call and suffers.
Yeah, so this Padosi example is indeed not just in civil services, in across all like walks of life. Our needs, once starting to be get determined by our neighbor, is where the problem starts. Sir, in this book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, across the 88 chapters, and I'll share my personal thing, that I was really touched about some narrations. For example, that old man who came up to you when you were like handling the revenue courts in UP, who had to borrow money and come so frequently to attend the hearing, and then you initiated the digitization. Your efforts to include like the workers engaged in brick construction in the fund for building and other construction welfare cess. So what are your larger thoughts on this book? I mean, each of the chapters has become quite profound in terms of the impact a civil servant can have. So what would be your thoughts on that, sir?
You know, I keep telling my colleagues also, especially my junior colleagues, that the amount of satisfaction that you can derive out of helping who's helpless cannot be compared with anything else. You gave two examples. You know, that guy who I met, that old man at the tap and Board of Revenue, you know, that set me thinking that what am I here for? Can I help him? So that question came to my mind. I made an effort, it worked. Similarly, in case of building the construction workers, all of us know that these brick kiln workers lead a terrible life, a very difficult life. Could we have helped them? So I interpreted the law in their favor. You know, some of us are very scared, and that is what I've done. I've written in my initial chapters. Some of us are just honest, full stop. So we are good to ourselves, but we don't do anything. Government doesn't pay us to be barely honest. Honesty is necessary, but not a sufficient condition. We are paid to deliver things on the ground, and we have the opportunity to do that. So am I using that opportunity? These are the questions that come. Now, when I interpreted that provision of law to help the building the construction workers or the brick kiln workers, initially there were some doubts in my mind because I was interpreting the law. Someone could question me, but you know, I had put in sufficient number of years by then to realize that I had yet to come across a situation where any officer has been hauled up for helping the poor. Now, so long as there's no direct violation of law, it is a question of how you interpret law. So I interpreted law in his favor. You know, something I did much earlier in my career, perhaps I won't do now. That was also to help a helpless man. When that man without, you know, who had lost his left hand came to meet me and I got his job back. You know, this guy had stolen money from the bank to buy drugs and he was thrown out.
Yes.
And I took the initiative to get him back in the service. Now, I did it at the spur of the moment then, but if I were to do now, I would certainly not do it because it's extremely risky to do that. But I did it. So, you know, as I said, you have your value system on the spot, you have a particular thought process, you go ahead and do it. But I was prepared to suffer the consequences of whatever I did. Now, of course, as you grow older, probably you may not be as daring as you were then. But nonetheless, I would still think positively to find solutions which I did much later in my life. Like, for example, I don't know whether you'll remember, there's a solution to the problem related to AeroCity, where 2,000 crores worth of investment was not coming through because
so
police had an objection that all the windows facing the... Now, I had by then put in 30 years of service. Even at that stage, I was thinking out of the box to find solution. Now that's how your brain is wired. You look at solutions, you don't look at rules. You first look at solutions and then see how you can use a rule to find a solution. Some of us first look at a rule and then do it. Now I have always advised all my colleagues and officers, never ever violate a express rule. But there is enormous amount of gray area in the legislations. It is then dependent on you, how do you interpret that law? And if you give good reason behind interpretation of that law, you will never come to grief.
And sir, I vividly remember another instance where, it is very difficult for a person like I am more of a millennial, that you had introduced Xerox machine, photocopying machine in that land record department, where people used to note it, copy it out, and so a lot of people lost their employment in some way. There would have been so much resistance, but you took a firm stand. So those would have been like epic moments.
For me, I don't know why and how, but now of course I can rationalize and say that came very inherently to me, that the weaker section of the society or the weaker person required support of the government. The person who are good, they'll be able to manage the government. They'll somehow. But here are poor guys coming from villages, and for getting a copy of a land record, they have to run from pillar to post, pay through their nose. They don't have money. Now, when you go around, how much nonsense that is going around. Of course, that was initial brush with technology. Much later now, something which I couldn't do, and now I'm trying to do to help somebody do it, is to bring digital system to an extent that a common man doesn't have to go to any government office. So, from a photocomic machine journey to a situation where the common man doesn't have to go to any government office, it's a huge journey. And the conviction comes from what I did during the course of my career, where I did feel that if we provide support to these poor people, helpless people, it gives you enormous amount of satisfaction. That satisfaction, as you said, there's no lucrative job anywhere in the world to replace that sense of satisfaction.
Yes, sir, because you say I have studied from IIM Ahmedabad and I have seen, batchmates becoming investment bankers, management consultants, earning storied salaries. And therefore, and some of them actually take up civil services as a career because they are really besotted by the impact that they can create. And your stories, the book, the entire,
Absolutely.
each of the pages actually drives home that point. So post-retirement, you've been part of so many noble social initiatives. Now, so one option could be, okay, I have done enough. It's been 38 years. Now I'll just relax. But then what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated every day? And if you could just tell us about what are you currently engaged in?
It's very simple. You said you will relax. No, everyone has his own way of relaxing. If I'm lying idle, I will never feel relaxed. So it is in Jivan Chalne ka naam is, as you keep moving, you feel relaxed. So if I lie down in a bed and do nothing, probably I'll be very agitated with myself. So long as I can think, so long as I can walk and talk, I'd rather be a participant in improving things around me and improving myself rather than, lie and relax. To me, that's relaxing. If I deliver something, the sense of satisfaction that I derive is very relaxing. So post-retirement, I also thought maybe I'll not be as active as it turned out to be. But as luck would have it, I'm more active than I was as secretary. Of course, now I decide my schedule. Earlier, a lot of it was determined by other people. Now I decide. That's the better part of it. So I keep telling everyone, I find this life even better. Of course, as a civil servant, I now visualize that I would want to be a civil servant all over again. But post-retirement, I'm finding it even better than civil service because here I have the freedom to do what I want to do totally. I decide what I want to do. I can talk to anybody. I can talk anything. I can do anything. It's enormous amount of freedom. And of course, whatever I earned in various capacities is helping me to remain at peace with myself.
Now, a bit of personal question. So, sir, on the health front, sir, what is your fitness regime? Like you told in one of the YouTube videos that you've now started chewing your food more slowly as compared to just gulping it because your wife gave you a candid feedback about that.
Yes.
So what is your fitness regime? What are the changes that you've undertaken in your lifestyle now?
Not much. I do about 15 to 20 minutes of physical exercise in the morning. And in the evening, I walk for about half an hour. That's the physical regime that I have, nothing much.
And you've started chewing food more slowly now.
Yes, many things. Yeah, one is still learning, as I keep saying. Post-retirement, since I have to spend more time at home, so I have to go by the discipline that my wife imposes on me. So, so I chew food slightly more than what I did earlier.
So you've written 2 books. What are those books which really inspire you on an individual level?
I'm a very avid reader. I in the past I think 7-8 years I've read about 100 books per year, more than 100 books every year. I love reading. I love reading. I had this dream of writing a book, so I wrote one, and then when I wrote one, I thought I can write another one. So the writing came because of my reading, and there are a number of books that influenced me. I think if I have to mention a few of them, the books that impressed me, of course, the one by the Mahatma, My Experiments with Truth. Then, of course, one by Robin Sharma, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Then, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, Secret by Rhonda Byrne, and some other non-personality building books also, which were fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed reading them, quite a few of them. Books on economics, for example, by Thomas Friedman. Not The World is Flat. World is Flat is a fantastic book, but even better is The Nexus and the Olive Tree. That is probably a seminal book on the market economy. So there are a number of books that I have enjoyed reading, and I still read a lot. Of course, in the past 3 months, because of my second book release, I have not been reading so much, but I read quite a lot and I love it.
So your favorite song and movie?
Sorry?
So your favorite song and movie?
Song. My favorite song is Kisi Ki Muskuraton Pe Ho Nisar. I love that song, and I feel inspired by that song.
And movie?
I'm very fond of music. I'm very fond of music. I composed music at some point in time. I still do a little bit of music. I strum the guitar. I write lyrics. So some of them are mentioned in my books also. The lyrics that I have written. So I enjoy music because I jokingly tell people that they ask me, why did you compose music? I said, instead of facing music, I wanted others to face my music. I composed music in different ways. So it was a huge relaxation. The music, when I sit with my guitar, it's a meditation for me. When I'm with the guitar, I forget the world around me. I don't meditate otherwise, but that's meditation for me.
And some movie, your favorite movie?
Movies, a number of movies. I think movies, I can pick up one movie which set me really thinking. That was Anand. That really set me thinking.
Okay.
One in which you had Rajesh Khanna.
Yes.
That movie, I can pick that movie out. I can't pick moments in my life, but this is one movie which really hit me hard about life, its philosophies, understanding on how you can continue to share, spread happiness irrespective of what's going to you. So that was quite a phenomenal in that sense.
So my final question, in retrospect, what would Mr. Anil Swarup advice be to his younger self, that is Anil Swarup at the age of 20? Because this is my typical audience on this show.
My advice to them is, don't brood over the past. Enjoy every moment that you have now, because that's the only thing that you have control over. Past is dead and gone. Future, you don't know. Moments you live in. Enjoy the moments that you are in. So long as you are enjoying the moments, you will be a successful person. When you are not enjoying the moments, difficult to be successful.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your wonderful thoughts on this. And I would urge the viewers to do read the book Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. And I'm sure it's not just a civil servant is obviously a natural thing. You need to read the both together to get a complete holistic understanding. So thank you so much, sir, for coming on this show. And it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.